Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk about the recent Yuumi nerfs and more or less how to consider nerfs and how to evaluate nerfs before deciding if a champion has gotten nerfed to the ground or buffed to the stratosphere. So if you're not aware, you should go back and read the patch notes if you're not familiar with the changes I'm talking about, but on 10.13, Yuumi did receive what a lot of people consider to be a hefty nerf. Now, while her E's mana cost was reduced significantly at almost all ranks, I believe it's only now like 65, 80 mana or thereabouts at max rank as opposed to 160 as it used to be on a previous patch. But it also now costs her 15% of her maximum mana every time she casts the ability. Now, a lot of Yuumi players especially, and even people I know are saying, wow, Yuumi just got so strongly nerfed and this sucks and the champion's unplayable now and I don't even want to play Yuumi anymore because of how weak she's going to be. And I don't know necessarily if that's a fair justification or if that's a fair thing to say about the changes. On its face, it does look like it's a fairly significant nerf to the champion, but this is kind of where I'm going to go ahead and talk about the main crux of my argument here, which is that it's not actually that big of a nerf. And more or less, how do you evaluate these kinds of changes in this sort of situation? Now, first and foremost, the biggest thing for me when evaluating the change is how different is it than its previous incarnation? Because this isn't just a straight numbers change. Ordinarily, if the mana cost just goes up, well, that's a nerf. Or if the mana cost goes down, well, that's a buff. But in this situation, Yuumi's mana cost base was decreased significantly, but gained 15% max mana cost. Now, how deadly is this? How bad is this for the champion? Well, that requires you to look at it a little bit. You can do the numbers if you want, but a lot of it requires just a critical thinking. So, first and foremost, yeah, Yuumi now costs 15% of her maximum mana, but because the cost is so low, that's going to depend a lot on what her maximum mana actually looks like. If Yuumi's max mana is like 5,000, then yeah, 15% of that is going to be a pretty big chunk of mana every time she presses E on top of whatever the cost was of the ability in its usual state. However, if you look at Yuumi when she has maybe 2,000 mana, well, that's not too bad of a cost, and you might be willing to pay that repeatedly in order to actually get the cost, especially given that the 15% isn't that big of a deal the less mana you have. So in that regard, what this means is that Yuumi's max mana builds, where she's building Tear the Goddess into potentially some more AP items, that definitely got nerfed. Yuumi is not going to be able to build lots of mana because the 15% guarantees that she's going to be paying a good chunk of mana no matter what her build looks like, if she's trying to build maximum mana or if she ignores building maximum mana. However, this then leads into another situation where a lot of support itemization, especially enchanter itemization, so champions like Soraka or Lulu or Janna, tend to have the similar itemization where they all build things like Redemption, Ardent Censer, Mikhail's Crucible, and the like. And now the reason this is important to point out is that Riot, a while back, tried to say they want different classes of champions bound to different stats. So Juggernauts are supposed to be bound to attack, damage, and health. Tanks are supposed to be bound to armor and magic resistance. You kind of get the point. Enchanters were intended to be bound to health and mana regeneration. The idea being that these are the kind of champions that should have the maximum amount of uptime on the map because of their general role in being able to ward areas and needing to be with their team members. So even if the person they were babysitting has to go back to base or died, they still have the ability to kind of keep going because they know their mana regen and health regen will let them continue to support the rest of their team. In this regard, this means that a lot of these support items do grant mana regeneration instead of flat mana, which is really good if you are trying to get multiple spellcasts, and this is essentially why I'm saying that Yuumi changes don't matter too much, because if you look at the itemization that exists in the game that's already intended for a champion of Yuumi's type, then it doesn't really matter, because Yuumi is going to be building magic resistance now, mana regeneration now, completely different stat, but mana regeneration, and that means that she's going to be regenerating a lot of the mana she does use. So even if she has a small pool, she's limiting the number of times, the amount of mana that the 15% tax is going to cost her, and she's going to be able to regenerate it much quicker because she has that ability to just kind of regenerate the mana that she spent on the E. Now, what this does mean for Yuumi, and I'm not going to try to flavor it as if it wasn't a nerf, it very definitely was, but what this does mean for Yuumi is that her other abilities are going to cost her a lot more. Whereas before, she could kind of press Q and E off cooldown because she'd have such a large mana pool that she'd essentially never run out, especially not if she was hopping off to proc her passive. Now she has to be a little bit more cognizant of when she actually uses her abilities, because she's going to get fewer Qs, she's going to get fewer Es in a short burst. Her ultimate is going to take a lot more of her mana pool, so she might not be able to press R if she's been poking or healing significantly before a team fight actually breaks out. That's the important thing to keep in mind, is that in bursts, or if she's really rapidly trying to use her abilities in quick succession, for example in a team fight, she will get fewer casts because she's not building max mana, she's building mana regeneration, so she will burn through her available pool much more quickly, but she will get her mana back more quickly as well, so she'll be able to cast more spells over a longer period of time. So in situations where Yuumi is in lane, for example, which is very long, very focused on sustain, in situations where Yuumi is a part of a siege or a part of an anti-siege, where you're just trying to exchange poke with enemies and protect your towers, in those particular situations, Yuumi is going to be much stronger because she has more spells over the long period of time. She's able to keep healing longer, she's able to keep poking longer, she just won't be able to cast all of her spells immediately off cooldown every single time, lest she burn through her full pool. And so that's the kind of thing that you can kind of look at and say, okay, yeah, so it was a net nerf at the end of the day, but it doesn't hurt Yuumi in lane. It doesn't hurt Yuumi in terms of the items that she can build as an enchanter. And generally speaking, it's not that big of a deal at the end of the day for Yuumi in situations where she should be strong. If anything, it refines Yuumi's identity to a place where, yeah, this is the champion you pick when you're just focused around sustain. She now has a better niche as a poke comp type champion because she sort of has the ability to sustain your team over the long run, to look for prowling projectiles, to wear down enemy teams in siege situations, that sort of a thing, as opposed to being a sort of generally useful picker in every situation champion, which is where she currently is. And I did want to actually kind of mention this as an anecdote. There was a while back where, very close to the sort of beginning of League of Legends, where Riot Games actually nerfed Vladimir. They had a nerf in the patch notes, they had a nerf on the PBE, they said they were going to nerf Vlad. But due to either a bug or a glitch, or they changed their mind at the last minute, they actually didn't publish the nerf. It never went through. They ended up not actually going through with it at all, but it was still listed in the patch notes as Vladimir was being nerfed. And of course, his mains complained immediately without even realizing that Vladimir hadn't been nerfed. In fact, his win rate fell down on that patch because even though he hadn't been nerfed, there was no change made to that champion, but because his player base assumed he'd been nerfed, because his player base basically said, oh, well, you know, Riot published the patch notes, so he had to have been nerfed. Even though nothing about the champion is fundamentally different, his win rate went down, which is kind of silly when you think about it, but it goes to show the power of perceptions without actually looking at data. Riot did eventually come out and say, yeah, so for whatever reason, the nerf didn't actually go through. He's been totally fine this whole time. I believe they did end up publishing the nerf anyways, so it ended up being a moot point. But the fact of the matter is that the player perception mattered far more than the actual balance change meant. And I believe that's something to keep in mind when we read patch notes in the future, especially when we're looking at a champion like Yuumi or another champion who gets nerfed in a very significant way. Look at the nerf and think critically, okay, what does this actually change about the champion? How is this going to adjust the champion? And more importantly, is there a way for the champion to adjust their build or adjust their playstyle to compensate for the fact that this nerf actually went through? Because a lot of the times you'll find that, yeah, it does make them weaker, but also they can occasionally have ways to compensate for it, or it wasn't that big of a nerf in the first place, like some of the other changes that went through on this most recent patch. So I guess that's sort of the point I'm making here, is that make sure to read the patch notes and look carefully at what they're actually saying for your favorite champions. Anyways, that's going to be it for me today, guys. Go ahead and let me know what you think of the Yuumi nerfs down in the comment section below. Would love to hear your thoughts, especially if you play Yuumi and you've had the chance to test her after the nerfs went through. Would love to hear your thoughts in particular on how you think those changes landed. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Thank you. Once again, thank you all so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.